Most people won't see this coming until it's too late. A hidden financial squeeze is building, and if you're in the wrong state, your taxes could skyrocket fast. Number 7, Kentucky. Kentucky doesn't usually show up in national conversations about financial instability, which is exactly why the situation there is easy to miss. Most residents continue living their daily routines, working their jobs, paying their mortgages, and assuming the system around them will continue functioning the way it always has. But underneath that surface stability, Kentucky has been dealing with a growing imbalance for years. The state made long-term retirement promises to hundreds of thousands of public workers, including teachers, police officers, and government employees. Those promises were made with the expectation that future investment returns and economic growth would provide enough funding to support them. The problem is that the funding never kept up with the size of those commitments. Today, Kentucky carries tens of billions of dollars in retirement obligations that do not have full financial backing. That gap forces the state to dedicate a large portion of its annual budget just to keep those systems functioning. Imagine a household where nearly a quarter of the monthly income goes toward paying off past obligations before groceries, housing, or transportation are even considered. That leaves very little room to adapt when unexpected expenses appear. Kentucky faces the same kind of limitation. When revenue slows down during economic downturns, the state cannot easily reduce pension costs, and it cannot instantly generate new revenue without raising taxes. This is where homeowners begin to feel the pressure first. Property taxes become one of the most reliable ways for governments to increase revenue quickly. If Kentucky's financial pressure continues building, homeowners may see steady increases over time. At the same time, rising taxes can make housing less attractive to buyers, which can slow property value growth. That creates a frustrating situation where residents pay more each year but see less benefit in return. Kentucky also depends heavily on federal funding to support its overall budget. If federal spending priorities shift or funding slows, Kentucky would need to compensate internally. That would likely accelerate the pressure on taxpayers even further. Residents like Michael, who bought a home expecting stability, may find themselves paying more each year just to stay in place. Kentucky shows how financial pressure builds gradually without dramatic headlines. But the next state is already further along that path, and residents there are feeling the effects in real time. Number 6, New Jersey. New Jersey already has some of the highest property taxes in the country, and that alone has changed how residents think about their future. Families like Daniel's, who have lived in the same neighborhood for years, are starting to notice that each annual tax bill rises faster than income. At first, the increases seem manageable, but over time they begin to affect long-term decisions. Some residents begin questioning whether staying makes financial sense. New Jersey carries enormous retirement obligations that must be paid regardless of population changes. These obligations do not shrink when residents move away. Instead, they remain fixed, which means fewer people must support the same financial burden. That creates a dangerous cycle. As taxes rise, some residents relocate to lower-cost states. When they leave, the tax base shrinks. With fewer taxpayers available, the state must rely even more heavily on those who remain. This cycle has already begun. Thousands of residents have left New Jersey in recent years, and every departure adds more pressure to the system. Businesses also evaluate their options. Companies consider relocating to nearby states with lower operating costs, which reduces job opportunities and slows economic growth. New Jersey's economy also relies heavily on financial services, which are undergoing significant changes. Automation and technology are reducing the need for certain roles, which affects income levels and tax revenue. When income declines, tax collections decline as well. That forces the state to find alternative ways to close the gap. Residents like Daniel face difficult decisions. Staying means accepting higher long-term costs. Leaving means abandoning familiarity and stability. New Jersey demonstrates how financial pressure doesn't just affect numbers on a spreadsheet. It affects real people making real-life choices. But the next state faces an even more fragile situation because it depends heavily on a small number of top earners. Number 5, Connecticut. Connecticut's financial structure depends heavily on its highest-earning residents. A small percentage of taxpayers contribute a disproportionately large share of total tax revenue. As long as those individuals remain in Connecticut, the system continues operating smoothly. But when even a small number relocate, the financial impact becomes immediate. Residents like Jonathan, who works in finance, have options. States like Florida and Texas offer lower taxes and lower living costs. When Jonathan considers relocating, the decision affects more than just personal finances. It also affects Connecticut's overall revenue. When enough individuals make similar decisions, the state begins losing a critical source of funding. At the same time, Connecticut carries large retirement and healthcare obligations that must be funded regardless of population changes. These obligations do not shrink when taxpayers leave. Instead, they remain constant, creating a growing imbalance between revenue and commitments. This imbalance forces difficult decisions. Connecticut can reduce spending, but that affects public services. It can increase taxes, but that risks encouraging even more departures. Neither option solves the problem completely. The housing market also reflects these pressures. Home values in certain areas have remained stagnant compared to other states, while property taxes have continued rising. Homeowners like Sarah find themselves paying more each year without seeing significant growth in property value. Connecticut shows how financial systems can become dependent on a small group of contributors. When that group begins shrinking, the effects spread quickly. But the next state faces a completely different vulnerability tied directly to global economic conditions. Number 4, Hawaii. Hawaii's financial stability depends heavily on tourism, which creates both opportunity and vulnerability. When tourism is strong, revenue flows consistently. Businesses operate at full capacity. Employment remains stable, government tax collections remain healthy, but tourism is highly sensitive to economic conditions. When global travel slows, Hawaii feels the effects immediately. Restaurants see fewer customers, hotels operate below capacity, retail stores experience declining sales. This reduces overall tax revenue. At the same time, Hawaii has one of the highest costs of living in the country. Housing, food, and transportation all cost significantly more than mainland averages. Residents like David, who works in hospitality, rely on steady tourism income to maintain financial stability. When visitor numbers decline, income declines as well. Hawaii's geographic isolation makes adjustment more difficult. Relocation costs are higher, supply chains are longer. Economic recovery takes longer compared to mainland states. If government revenue declines significantly, Hawaii may rely more heavily on property and income taxes to maintain financial balance. That creates additional pressure on residents already facing high living costs. Hawaii demonstrates how dependence on a single industry creates financial fragility. But the next state reveals what happens when financial pressure builds over decades without resolution. Before moving to number 3, subscribe now if you want to stay informed about financial changes that affect your future. Most people only react after changes happen. Staying informed early gives you more control over your decisions. Number 3, Illinois. Illinois has been managing financial strain for decades. The state carries massive retirement obligations that continue growing regardless of economic conditions. These obligations require consistent funding every year. At the same time, Illinois has experienced significant population decline. Residents like Robert have relocated to neighboring states in search of lower costs and better opportunities. When residents leave, tax revenue declines, but the obligations remain unchanged. Chicago, Illinois' largest economic center, plays a major role in supporting the state's financial system. Changes in commercial real estate demand and business activity affect overall tax collections. When commercial properties lose value or remain vacant, tax revenue declines. Property taxes have already increased significantly over the years. Continued financial pressure could lead to further increases, affecting homeowners across the state. Illinois demonstrates how financial pressure can build gradually for years before reaching critical levels. But even large states face similar challenges. Number 2, California. California has one of the largest economies in the world, which creates the impression of financial strength. But the state depends heavily on high-income earners and investment-related tax revenue. This creates volatility. During strong economic periods, tax revenue increases rapidly, but during downturns, revenue can decline just as quickly. California also carries massive retirement obligations that require consistent funding. Population shifts have already begun affecting revenue patterns. Residents like Kevin have relocated to lower-cost states, taking tax revenue with them. California also faces infrastructure obligations that require ongoing investment. Maintaining roads, utilities, and public systems requires continuous funding. California demonstrates that even large economies are not immune to financial pressure. But the final state faces perhaps the most concentrated financial risk of all. Number 1, New York. New York's financial system depends heavily on New York City. The city generates a massive portion of the state's total tax revenue. When economic conditions change in the city, the effects spread throughout the state. Commercial real estate plays a major role in generating tax revenue. Changes in workplace trends have reduced demand for office space. This affects property values and tax collections. New York also depends heavily on the financial industry. Technological changes and automation are reshaping employment patterns. This affects income tax revenue. Residents like Anthony, who works in finance, face uncertainty about long-term stability. Changes in employment patterns affect both income and housing demand. New York demonstrates how concentrated financial systems create vulnerability. Comment below and share your thoughts. And watch the next video to see which states are gaining strength while others struggle.